In December 1988, 23-year-old journalism student Lisa Lynn Bishop embarked on a sea voyage from which she would never return. She allegedly boarded an 82-foot freighter named the Frieden, captained by 28-year-old German national Florian Meyer, and accompanied by 7 Haitian crew members. Their destination was Haiti, but they never arrived, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Lisa, hailing from Atlanta, Georgia, was passionate about journalism and sought to explore the stark economic contrast between the United States and Haiti. This trip was an opportunity for her to delve into the socio-economic conditions of Haiti, aiming to craft a compelling narrative for her studies. Her enthusiasm for the voyage was evident, despite concerns from her parents and her boyfriend Paul Cornwell, who owned the nightclub where Lisa had met Florian a year prior. Paul recalled their discussions before her departure, with Lisa being convinced that this trip was her golden opportunity to gather material for a groundbreaking article. On December 17, 1988, the Frieden set sail from Miami at approximately 2:30 p.m. The plan was to reach Haiti within a few days. However, when Christmas passed without any communication from Lisa, her family and Paul grew increasingly anxious. Their concerns led them to contact the U.S. Coast Guard, which subsequently launched a search operation in the Caribbean. Despite their efforts, no trace of the Frieden or its occupants was found during the initial search. The mystery deepened in April 1989 when Bob Nyberg, an underwater salvager, came across an article about the missing freighter. He realized that he had seen the Frieden docked in Georgetown Harbor on Grand Cayman Island, far from the intended destination, approximately 2 weeks after it was reported missing. This sighting suggested that the ship had veered significantly off course. Further investigations revealed that Florian had been spotted on the island in the company of an unidentified man. These revelations provided a glimmer of hope to Lisa's family, but also raised numerous questions about the circumstances leading to the ship's disappearance. Delving deeper, Paul Cornwell discovered that Florian had connections with a Haitian individual named Philippe, who had reportedly chartered the Frieden. There were insinuations that Philippe might have been involved in human smuggling operations, or your more standard smuggling, casting a shadow over the nature of the voyage. This information led to significant official speculation about possible foul play. Despite these leads, the trail eventually went cold. Over the years, there have been sporadic reports of the Frieden being sighted under different names, but none have been conclusively verified. The families of the Haitian crew members also reported no contact since the disappearance, and Florian's parents stated they hadn't heard from him since 1988. These factors suggest various possibilities, including the ship sinking due to adverse conditions or mechanical failure, or the crew falling victim to criminal activities. While the human trafficking angle has been given significant weight, there are a few factors here that complicate that theory. Florian and the 7 Haitian crew members disappeared as well, which suggests that Lisa wasn't the only one targeted. Another theory suggests that the purpose for the trip to Haiti was to pick up a shipment of substances to be brought back to the United States. Under this theory, the crew members of the Frieden were eliminated and their cash for the substances confiscated. Capgras delusion is a rare psychiatric disorder in which a person believes that someone close to them, a spouse, friend, or family member, has been replaced by an identical-looking imposter. Although uncommon, it can occur in various conditions, such as schizophrenia, dementia, and bipolar disorder. People experiencing Capgras may become fearful or hostile toward the supposed imposter, which can seriously strain relationships and overall well-being. Historically, Capgras delusion can be traced back to 1923, when French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras published a report describing the phenomenon in detail. He introduced the notion that some patients might claim their loved ones had been replaced by doubles, even though they recognized their faces on a purely visual level. Capgras observations pointed to a disconnect between emotional recognition and the familiarity response, effectively laying the groundwork for modern research on this delusion. Early interpretations of Capgras delusion were largely psychoanalytic. Physicians believed it might reflect hidden conflicts or unconscious feelings toward the replaced loved one. Over time, however, the emphasis shifted toward neurological explanations. Researchers began noticing that patients with certain types of brain injuries or dementia sometimes manifested Capgras-like symptoms. This shift highlighted the possibility that lesions or degenerative changes in regions responsible for face processing and emotional response could give rise to delusional misidentification. In present-day understanding, the delusion is often thought to result from a disruption in the normal integration of face recognition. Ordinarily, when you see someone you experience a sense of familiarity that goes beyond mere visual recognition. For individuals with Capgras, the visual recognition process remains intact, yet they don't feel the expected emotional connection. Clinical presentations of Capgras can vary widely. Some patients are only mildly affected and will simply comment that something is off about their loved ones. Others, however, may become convinced that an elaborate conspiracy is at play, believing multiple imposters have replaced different people in their life. In severe cases, the delusion can lead to aggression or refusal to interact with the supposed double, creating challenges for caregivers and mental health professionals alike. Treatment for Capgras delusion typically depends on the underlying condition. If the person has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, psychiatrists may prescribe antipsychotic medications to reduce or even entirely eliminate delusional thinking. In cases where dementia or a neurological injury is the culprit, interventions might focus on managing cognitive deficits and creating supportive environments. On October 28, 1991, 29-year-old Selena Marie Eden vanished after being last seen at a hospital in San Francisco, California. Selena, a former Air Force member turned journeyman construction worker, was known for her daring spirit and independence. On November 29, 1989, her life fractured when her motorcycle collided with a truck in San Francisco. Admitted to the hospital as a Jane Doe, she suffered catastrophic injuries that left her in a 6-week coma. She suffered permanent damage to her left eye, her left thigh was crushed, and she suffered fluid buildup around her brain. Unsurprisingly, she also suffered from significant memory loss, even losing her core memories of who she was. Her ID was lost in the accident, delaying her family's awareness of her condition for 7 days. After 2 months of hospitalization, Selena moved to San Diego with her mother, Clarissa, to recuperate. Though her physical health improved, her mental state deteriorated. She experienced confusion, frustration, and personality changes, often forgetting conversations or lashing out in anger. For anyone unaware, these are pretty typical symptoms of someone who suffered from a traumatic brain injury. Clarissa noted that Selena reverted to a, quote, childlike demeanor and had a serious inability to accept her limitations. By May 1990, Selena insisted on returning to San Francisco, hoping familiarity would aid her recovery. Instead, her mental struggles deepened, with friends observing her disorientation and memory lapses. Selena maintained regular phone contact with her mother until October 1991. During their last conversation, she grew evasive, telling Clarissa, quote, "Don't worry if you don't hear from me for a month or 2. Days later, on October 28th, she was last seen at a San Francisco hospital. A private investigator hired by her family later reported unconfirmed sightings in the Tenderloin district, a gritty neighborhood known for homelessness and crime. However, these sightings didn't lead to any concrete evidence. Intriguingly, Selena had confided in friends about plans to leave San Francisco with a mysterious woman. Tracy Cavaretta, a friend, recalled Selena mentioning a haphazard plan to travel to the Midwest with this individual, though she provided no details about the woman's identity. Unfortunately, while Tracy had been told where the specific location would be, she forgot this crucial piece of information. This claim, coupled with Selena's vulnerable mental state, fueled speculation about coercion or exploitation. A number of theories exist in relation to Selena's mysterious disappearance. Selena's brain injuries left her prone to confusion and memory loss. Friends described her wandering into traffic or forgetting familiar faces, raising the possibility that she became disoriented and succumbed to exposure or an accident. The Tenderloin District's dangers, overdoses, violence, or untreated medical crises could have claimed her life, with her remains going unidentified due to lack of records. Notably, while Selena didn't have any substance issues prior to the accident, traumatic brain injuries are known to significantly change individuals' personalities. Exploitation or some sort of foul play are also factors that have been considered. The mysterious woman Selena referenced remains a haunting enigma. Investigators theorized she could have been part of a predatory network targeting vulnerable individuals. Selena's physical and cognitive limitations made her an easy mark for trafficking or forced labor. However, no corroborating evidence or similar cases linked to this woman have emerged. Some speculate Selena intentionally severed ties to escape the anguish of her post-accident life. Yet this theory conflicts with her close bond with her family and her reliance on their support. She left behind personal belongings and had no access to significant funds, making a planned departure unlikely. Some theorize that she experienced a dissociative fugue or simply a state of amnesia due to her brain injury. Notably, dissociative fugues are commonly associated with brain injuries and also result in people going on unexpected and unplanned trips, sometimes starting new lives permanently. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, asking you to take a moment and hit the share button and send this video to 2 friends or family members. Also, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss one of my very consistent uploads. Jevons paradox is a concept that's often mentioned in discussions about energy efficiency and resource consumption. It states that when technological improvements increase the efficiency of using a resource, the rate of consumption of that resource can actually go up instead of down. This idea first appeared in the work of William Stanley Jevons, who was a notable British economist in the 19th century. William Stanley Jevons first presented this paradox in his 1865 book, The Coal Question. In Victorian-era Britain, coal was the backbone of industry, fueling factories and railway networks. Jevons observed that as steam engines and industrial processes became more efficient in their use of coal, total coal consumption did not decrease. In fact, it increased. This was puzzling at first glance, as one might have assumed that if machines required less coal to operate, then the overall need for coal would drop. But Jevons noted the opposite was true. As machines grew more efficient, operating costs fell, manufacturers could produce more goods at lower prices, and society's demand for coal-powered products and services expanded. Jevons' finding was especially significant at a time when Britain's economic success depended heavily on the availability and price of coal. If Britain's industrial sector could produce more output using the same or smaller amount of coal, it gained a competitive advantage. The cheaper and more accessible coal-based energy became, the more manufacturers wanted to exploit it, leading to a surge in total coal usage. Jevons warned that this could eventually deplete Britain's coal reserves, sparking debates about resource scarcity and sustainable growth. His argument about increased efficiency driving higher resource consumption has had a lasting influence on economic thought. Jevons' paradox challenges the intuitive belief that efficiency gains automatically lead to conservation. The paradox arises because of a basic principle of economics. As a resource becomes cheaper to use, people find more ways to use it, and demand for it increases. So, while individual devices or processes may become more efficient, the total consumption of that resource may actually grow. An example of this principle at work in the modern era can be seen in the automotive industry. Cars have become more fuel efficient over time through advancements in engine technology, aerodynamics, and lighter materials. But as vehicles get more miles per gallon, driving becomes cheaper on a per mile basis, and it can encourage people to drive more frequently or opt for larger vehicles. And for anyone who's older than 20, you'll remember a time when every vehicle you see wasn't an SUV or a truck. When multiplied across millions of drivers, these behavioral shifts can partially or even fully offset the efficiency gains, leading to a steady or increasing overall fuel consumption. Jevons paradox continues to capture attention because it runs counter to the optimistic narrative that technology alone can solve our resource and environmental challenges. In many policy debates, increasing efficiency is often promoted as a major strategy to conserve resources. While efficiency measures can indeed help, this paradox warns us that it's not always as straightforward as it seems. Cryptozoology is a field that's full of mysterious creatures that defy easy classification. Among these is the ahul, a cryptid said to inhabit the remote rainforests of Java, Indonesia. The ahul first came to the attention of Western audiences through the work of British naturalist Dr. Ernest Bartels in the 1920s. He was exploring a waterfall on the slopes of Mount Salak in West Java when he claimed to have heard a loud, distinct cry. Bartels later described encountering a massive flying creature with a wingspan of around 12 feet. According to his account, it had a primate-like head, large dark eyes, and long clawed forearms. While he's the most well-known source of the ahul legend, the creature has roots in Javanese folklore. Indigenous communities in Java have long told stories of giant bats or bird-like creatures that dwell deep in the rainforest. These stories often serve as cautionary tales, warning against venturing into certain areas or disturbing the natural balance of the jungle. Over time, these tales were woven into the cultural fabric of the region, further mystifying the ahul. Descriptions of the ahul are consistent in some ways, but vary in others. Witnesses generally agree on the creature's size, which is said to rival that of a very small airplane. The ahul is often described as having leathery wings, similar to a bat's, and a fur-covered body. Its face is said to resemble that of a primate, leading some to speculate it might be a previously undiscovered species of bat. The creature's call is its most distinctive feature. The loud, haunting howl is often reported at night, lending an air of mystery to the sightings. Witnesses claim the ahul is nocturnal, emerging from caves or dense canopies under the cover of darkness to hunt fish and other small prey. Its behavior aligns with some large bat species, adding a layer of plausibility to the sightings according to supporters. As with many cryptids, the ahul has inspired various scientific theories. Some researchers suggest it might be a misidentified known species, such as the flying lemur or the colugo. And as an aside, you're going to want to look at the screen to check out the colugo. Half of you are going to think it's the cutest animal ever and wonder why you've just heard about it, and the other half will wish you never saw the creature. Although these animals are significantly smaller than the ahul, their gliding ability and nocturnal habits might explain some of the reported sightings. Under this theory, shadows and low-light settings can significantly impact how the creature looks. Another theory is that the ahul is based on sightings of the giant fruit bat, or flying fox, which is native to Southeast Asia. These bats have wingspans of up to 5 feet and are often seen in large groups, which could amplify their perceived size and lend credence to the legend. However, the most intriguing hypothesis involves the possibility of a surviving prehistoric species. Some cryptozoologists suggest the ahul could be a descendant of the pterosaur, a type of flying reptile that lived millions of years ago. Others believe that the creature isn't one that can be explained by science, believing that it's some sort of folkloric beast. Despite numerous reports, there's little to go on with the ahul. No physical remains, clear photographs, or other definitive proof of the ahul's existence have ever been found. Notably, I wasn't even able to find a recording of the supposedly distinctive sound the ahul makes. This lack of evidence has led many to dismiss the ahul as a product of myth, misidentification, or exaggeration. The urban legend, commonly referred to as the choking Doberman, first gained widespread attention during the early 1980s. In its most well-known version, a couple returns home late at night to find their beloved Doberman Pinscher choking and seemingly unable to breathe. Panicked, they rush the dog to an emergency veterinarian who sedates the animal and discovers several human fingers lodged in its throat. As the vet works to stabilize the dog, the frantic couple returns home, only to find their kitchen or a nearby room in disarray. The implication is that a burglar had broken into the house, been attacked by the dog, and hastily fled the scene minus a few fingers. Though endlessly repeated, this story has never been verified with any confirmed documentation, and no reputable news source has ever produced evidence that it happened in reality. In the early 1980s, concerns over rising crime rates and home invasions in urban and suburban neighborhoods may have contributed to the popularity of the story. Dogs, especially powerful breeds like Dobermans, were commonly seen as protectors of the home. Thus, the tale of a guard dog heroically thwarting a burglar, albeit with a grisly twist, resonated with many listeners. In this way, the choking Doberman served as a cautionary tale. It warns of the dangers lurking just outside the family home's walls, while simultaneously reassuring homeowners that they weren't entirely defenseless against intruders. Like many urban legends, the details of the choking Doberman vary depending on the storyteller and the region. Some versions specify the couple's location as a city in the southwestern United States, while others provide no geographic details at all. Occasionally, the number of fingers found in the dog's mouth changes, and sometimes it's not fingers, but another body part. In other tellings, the couple phones the veterinarian from their home and is told, in chilling fashion, to leave the house immediately and await the authorities. The popularity of this legend was bolstered by its appearance in the media. A few tabloid-style publications hinted at similar incidents, further entrenching it in the public imagination. In June 1995, a quiet Colorado town was shaken by the unexplained death of David Chase, a 42-year-old cabinet maker and craftsman known for his quiet dedication to his work and family. On June 6, 1995, David's day began like any other, with work scheduled in the morning. He was set to complete a roofing job and help clear brush from a local club with his neighbor and occasional co-worker, Matt Orahosky. After finishing the job and spending some time working outdoors, David and Matt decided to take a break for lunch. Later that day, they visited a bank so that David could cash an $1,800 check he had received in advance for another job. After the bank, the pair went out for a drink at a local bar. David promised that this would be his last job with Matt for the day, and his wife, Judy, expected him to return home. Instead, the day ended without any sign of him. As night fell, Judy grew increasingly worried, not having heard from her husband. Her growing concern would soon mark the beginning of a chain of events that would leave more questions than answers. When Judy finally decided to find out what had happened, she went to Matt's house the next morning. There, Matt initially claimed that he had dropped David off at the bar and then went home himself, Later, however, Matt's story changed unexpectedly. According to a call from his girlfriend, Matt had told her that David had mentioned having a raft and had gone swimming in the nearby Bear Creek River. Judy found this explanation hard to believe. David was not the sort of person to risk swimming in a cold, snow-fed river, especially when he was known to be very cautious about such matters. With these inconsistencies in mind, she took her concerns to the local police. During questioning, Matt's account continued to shift. In one version, he claimed that the two had been drinking all day, while in another account, he stated that after leaving the bar, David had jumped into the river on his own and told him to pick him up later downriver. Later still, he insisted that David had merely fallen into the river when unloading some brushwood from their work. Each variation cast further doubt on his version of events, and the police began to consider that there might be more to the story than a simple accidental drowning. The case took a darker turn when, 6 weeks after David disappeared, his decomposing body was found in the Bear Creek River, about 3 miles downstream from where he was last seen. The autopsy report added to the mystery. While the findings were generally consistent with drowning, there were additional, unsettling details. The report showed that David had a broken neck, unusual cuts on his legs, and his clothing had been torn off. Only his shoes, socks, and a portion of his pant leg were recovered. These details struck many, including Judy, as inconsistent with a simple case of accidental drowning. Judy noted that David was known for always tucking his pants securely into his socks, which led her to suspect that someone might have deliberately removed his clothing after he was attacked. The investigation took an unexpected turn when a private investigator named Phil Harris entered the picture. And yeah, this isn't the usual unexpected turn you're expecting to see in a case like this. Buckle up, we're getting weird. Phil claimed that, on one October night, he was awakened by a disembodied voice identifying itself as David Chase. According to Phil, the voice stated plainly, "My name is David Chase," and advising him to, quote, "go buy the Sunday paper for confirmation." The voice explained that David had been slain and provided details of the event, which I'll be coming back to shortly. This startling message compelled Phil to take on the case, even though his methods and the very notion of communicating with a spirit were quite obviously unconventional. He recounted details that differed from Matt's inconsistent stories, though it's important to keep in mind that these were alleged revelations from a ghost. According to Phil, Matt had convinced David to cash his check in order to use the money for buying a truck. Later, when David expressed doubts about the purchase, a heated argument ensued. Phil claimed that this argument escalated quickly, and that Matt struck David with a blunt object, causing his neck to break. Phil further alleged that Matt, along with an unknown accomplice, had then disposed of David's body in the river. He stated that they altered the scene by cutting off parts of his clothing to hide evidence of the violent struggle. Despite his dramatic claims, Phil's investigation never led to a breakthrough. Tragically, a week after showing Judy a reservoir where he believed the weapon and bloody clothing had been discarded, Phil suddenly died of a heart attack. Throughout the investigation, the primary suspect remained Matt Orehosky. His shifting narratives and the discovery of an unexpected sum of cash in his glove compartment only fueled suspicions. Although police considered Matt a strong suspect, no charges were ever filed against him. The authorities were unable to conclusively tie him to the slaying, and the case eventually stalled, leaving many questions unanswered. Over the years, additional theories have emerged. Judy, still convinced of foul play, has pointed to potential connections between her husband's death and a human trafficking organization. She claimed that evidence surfaced linking the case to the custody issues involving the foster children she and David had hoped to adopt. However, Despite these assertions and additional investigations by private detectives, no corroborating evidence has been found to confirm such a connection. As a result, the theory remains one of many speculations in an already convoluted case. When looking at the available evidence, several key points stand out. First, the physical evidence from the autopsy likely contradicts the notion of an accidental drowning. The broken neck, unusual cuts on David's legs, and the state of his clothing suggest that foul play was involved. Second, Matt Orehowski's multiple shifting accounts of the night raise serious questions about his involvement. His explanations evolved from simply leaving David at the bar to suggesting that David had jumped or fallen into the river, with each version seeming less credible than the last. Then there's the unusual matter of Phil Harris's investigation. His claim of hearing David's voice may sound far-fetched, but it can't be dismissed outright given the strange nature of the case. Even if you don't accept the supernatural version of how this information was acquired, it's always possible Phil had another method of acquiring evidence and invented a convoluted story. It's always possible that there were leaks from within the investigation, and given that he was a private investigator, it's possible he had relationships with people in the police department. Unfortunately, given all the unusual circumstances involved in this case, I feel that barring a confession, we're unlikely to ever see a resolution to the case. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. Also, big shout out to all my patrons and YouTube members. You guys allow me to spend a ton of time pursuing content creation. Lachlan Cranswick's case remains one of the most perplexing and tragic disappearances in recent Canadian history. Born in Australia, Lachlan moved to Canada in 2003 to further his career in the sciences. He worked at the National Research Council's Canadian Neutron Beam Center at Chalk River Laboratories. There he specialized in applying neutron beams to study structural chemistry, magnetism, and geology. Known for his dedication to both his work and community activities, he was actively involved with local organizations such as the Deep River Curling Club. On January 18, 2010, Lachlan was last seen in his home in Deep River. Reports indicate that after a normal evening, marked by completing routine activities such as putting out the garbage, the scientist vanished without a trace. When friends and family grew concerned, a search was initiated. Investigators found that his home appeared undisturbed, lights were left on, the stove was still running, and his computer remained powered up. Essential items like his wallet, keys, and laptop were all found inside, and his vehicle was parked in the garage. These details painted a picture of a man who had seemingly left in a hurry, yet had not taken the usual belongings one would expect if planning an extended absence. His disappearance baffled local authorities because there was no evidence of a struggle or any indication that he had planned to leave. In the days that followed his disappearance, police and search teams scoured the local area using every resource available, including tracking dogs and helicopters. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Lachlan was found in the immediate vicinity. Authorities even extended the search to nearby hospitals and across the Ottawa River, yet nothing concrete emerged. The fact that his personal effects were undisturbed led investigators to lean toward the possibility of an accidental disappearance or foul play. It wasn't until the summer of 2010 that progress was made in the case. On June 11th, 2 canoeists reported finding what appeared to be human remains in shallow water near Welsh Bay on the Ottawa River, not far from Deep River. When first responders arrived on the scene, they recovered the body along with identification items, including his work ID badge from Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. A subsequent autopsy and DNA analysis confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Lachlan Cranswick. The official statement from the Government of Canada confirmed his identity, and marked the conclusion of the investigation from a law enforcement perspective. According to that statement, there was no indication of foul play or self-ending, findings that largely pointed to a tragic accident. Despite the official conclusion that Lachlan's death was accidental, various theories have circulated among online sleuths and within local discussions. One of the leading theories is that Lachlan, known for his passion for photography and the outdoors, may have stepped out during a quiet moment and inadvertently wandered onto thin ice. Given that his house was found with the stove still running and his computer left on, some speculate that he might have been distracted by something he wished to capture. They speculate he may have seen a natural phenomenon, or perhaps caught a fleeting glimpse of a rare animal. His colleagues and family members stress that Lachlan was not known to be depressed, which makes the accidental death theory more plausible. Notably, everyone who knew him found him to be extremely passionate about his work, with a strong zest for life. That said, individuals can harbor deep emotions hidden away from even their closest loved ones. Other theories, such as the possibility of an encounter with wild animals or even a case of carbon monoxide poisoning leading to disorientation, have been floated. However, these remain speculative, as the evidence just simply doesn't support either of these theories. Law enforcement maintained that if foul play were involved, physical evidence would have been uncovered during the extensive search operations. Others have speculated that he may have been slain for what he knew, given that he was a highly accomplished scientist in a very sensitive field. However, again, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support this theory. Notably, the scientific community took a fairly extraordinary step to honor Lachlan after his passing. A mineral was named cranswickite, ensuring that his legacy will never be forgotten. The Thunderbird, a name that evokes both ancient reverence and modern mystery, is a creature that straddles the line between myth and theoretical biological reality. While deeply rooted in indigenous spirituality, this colossal bird has also become a cornerstone of cryptozoology, with reported sightings persisting for centuries. The Thunderbird's origins lie in the spiritual traditions of tribes like the Ojibwe, Lakota, and Haida, where it symbolized power over storms and protection from malevolent forces. For the Algonquin peoples, it battled underwater serpents, its wing beats creating thunder and its gaze sparking lightning. Petroglyphs in Wisconsin dating back 2,000 years depict X-shaped thunderbirds, blending art with reverence for this celestial guardian. Modern cryptozoology frames the thunderbird as a giant, undocumented bird, or even a surviving prehistoric species. The most famous incident dates to 1890 near Tombstone, Arizona, where cowboys allegedly killed a featherless, alligator-faced creature with a 20 to 30-foot wingspan. This was later sensationalized in newspapers as a quote-unquote pterodactyl. Though no photo survived, the story fueled speculation about relic pterosaurs or teratorns, massive vultures which boasted a 23-foot wingspan. In 1977, a more visceral encounter occurred in Lawndale, Illinois, when a thunderbird-like creature reportedly lifted 10-year-old Marlon Lowe 2 feet off the ground before releasing him. Witnesses described a bird resembling an Andean condor but far larger, though skeptics dismissed it as misidentification or even a fabrication. Notably, the boy allegedly lifted up was 56 pounds, and the largest eagles have been observed lifting 15 pounds maximum. Now, I'm no bird physicist, but the sort of bird that would be capable of lifting a 56-pound child would have to be absolutely gigantic. But hey, if you're a bird physicist, let me know that I'm wrong in the comments section. Cryptozoologists have proposed numerous potential explanations for the thunderbird. According to theorists, the extinct Teratornis mariami could explain sightings. Its North American habitat overlaps with thunderbird legends, and fossil evidence shows it coexisted with early humans. While this may explain the oral history legends of the thunderbird, that are fairly widespread amongst Native Americans. It does little to explain any modern sightings. Some link the Thunderbird to pterosaurs, citing the 1890 smooth-skinned creature. However, given that pterosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, that makes this theory contentious to say the least. Skeptics argue that sightings which aren't fabricated are just run-of-the-mill bird misidentifications. For example, California condors have almost 10-foot wingspans and are incredibly rare, so a quick sighting of this rare creature may result in a misidentification. Others have proposed that sightings could be gigantic non-native species released from or escaped from private collections. On April 29, 1986, a farmer near Lawton, Oklahoma spotted smoke on a country road and alerted authorities. State troopers soon found a car engulfed in flames on a rural bridge. The blaze was so intense it even melted part of the guardrail, and a body was discovered inside, burned beyond recognition. Skid marks at the scene suggested the car had hit the bridge at high speed, so investigators initially assumed it was a fatal one-car accident. Police traced the vehicle to local resident Pat Conway, and the victim was soon identified as Pat's wife of 33 years, 50-year-old Aileen Conway. Pat immediately felt something about the accident scenario did not add up. When he returned home that day, he encountered several unnerving signs. The back door was wide open, Aileen's purse was left behind, an iron had been left out, a garden hose was running into the backyard pool, and the telephone was off the hook. These clues convinced Pat that his wife's death was no mere accidental mishap. In particular, the phone left dangling made him suspect Aileen had tried to call for help before she went missing. Pat pressed authorities to investigate further, contacting Ray Anderson from the district attorney's office to look into the case. Anderson initially presumed nothing criminal had occurred, but after reviewing the bizarre evidence at the Conway home, he agreed foul play was possible. When Anderson and Pat visited the crash site a few days later, they discovered a church bulletin from Aileen's car, lying in the grass roughly 200 feet from the wreck. Since Aileen always drove with her windows up, the bulletin could only have flown out if a car door had been opened while the vehicle was stationary. This clue led Anderson to suspect that someone else had been with Aileen and deliberately staged the accident. He theorized that an unknown assailant might have sent Aileen's car careening off the road to make her death appear accidental. Faced with these suspicious circumstances, authorities reclassified Aileen's death from an accident to unexplained and brought in state investigators to dig deeper. Experts from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and the Fire Marshal's office soon found evidence of arson. The car's interior was completely incinerated, far more destruction than a normal crash fire, and the gas cap was missing entirely. Tests on similar car upholstery further confirmed that a fire of such intensity would require a flammable accelerant. In light of these findings, investigators concluded that Aileen likely died as a result of foul play rather than an accident. However, they still had no firm suspects or motive, and the question remained: who would have wanted to harm Aileen, and why? From early on, the leading theory was that Aileen interrupted a burglary at her home. Investigators noted that several burglaries had been reported in the Conways' neighborhood around that time, making an interrupted burglary a plausible scenario. Indeed, some of Aileen's jewelry was found to be missing from the house, supporting the idea that intruders robbed the home and then abducted her. Another theory suggested that Aileen's death was a bizarre accident caused by a sudden medical emergency or disorientation. Perhaps, the theory goes, she suffered some kind of health crisis that led her to leave in a hurry and ultimately crash her car. Investigators found no evidence to support this notion, however, and it fails to explain the clear signs of arson at the scene. The death of Aileen Conway remains unsolved, and it's officially classified as an open suspicious death case. No arrests have ever been made and no suspects have ever been named, at least not publicly. I've seen some suggestions online that Pat Conway may have somehow been involved with the case, and I couldn't disagree more. Pat Conway's behavior and actions after the incident clearly demonstrate his innocence. He immediately alerted authorities to all the irregularities in the case and pressed for a much more thorough investigation. The fact that he invited the authorities into his home to document all unsettling signs at his house strongly indicates he had nothing to hide. His insistence on involving Ray Anderson further underscores his commitment to uncovering the truth, not concealing it. Seriously, if you're trying to cover up your involvement in your wife's death, you don't reach out to the district attorney's office to have her death reclassified. Precognition, the purported ability to foresee future events before they occur, has fascinated humanity for millennia. Rooted in the idea that the future might not be entirely random or unknowable, the concept has been central to countless myths, religious beliefs, and even scientific investigations. The idea of precognition dates back to ancient times. In many early societies, individuals claiming the ability to see the future were revered as shamans, prophets, oracles, or seers. The ancient Greeks, for example, sought guidance from the Oracle of Delphi, who was believed to channel the god Apollo to predict future events. Similarly, in ancient Rome, augurs interpreted signs, such as the flight of birds, to provide insights about what lay ahead. Religious traditions also embrace the concept of foreseeing the future. In Jewish and Christian traditions, precognitive visions are attributed to biblical figures like Joseph and Daniel, who interpreted dreams and predicted events through divine intervention. Across Asia, Hinduism and Buddhism incorporate the idea of spiritual enlightenment, granting insight into the future. In the modern era, precognition shifted from religious and mystical contexts to psychological and scientific scrutiny. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, the rise of the spiritualist movement brought renewed interest in psychic phenomena, including precognition. Mediums often claimed they could predict future events through communication with spirits or accessing some universal knowledge. While the history of precognition is steeped in mysticism, science has approached the topic cautiously. Broadly, scientific theories about precognition can be divided into two camps: those that claim it as a real phenomenon, and those that attribute it to cognitive or psychological mechanisms. Proponents of precognition argue that it may stem from abilities yet to be understood by science. Quantum mechanics has sometimes been invoked as a potential explanation, particularly concepts like non-locality and entanglement. Theoretical physicists like Roger Penrose and others have speculated about how the mind might access information outside the conventional flow of time, though these ideas remain speculative. Studies in parapsychology, such as experiments using random number generators, have sought to demonstrate precognitive abilities. One researcher, for example, conducted experiments where participants predicted future randomly generated events, such as the display of emotionally charged images. His results suggested that participants performed slightly better than chance, though critics have questioned the methodology and statistical rigor of such studies. Further, there's been difficulties replicating this study, which suggests that perhaps it wasn't very accurate at all. Skeptics argue that precognition can be explained through psychological mechanisms. The human brain is adept at recognizing patterns and making predictions based on incomplete information. What may feel like precognition could simply be subconscious processing of existing cues. For example, someone might predict a car accident after noticing subtle signs of reckless driving, but not consciously realizing they've done so. Another explanation is retroactive bias, where individuals reinterpret past events to fit a precognitive narrative. For instance, A dream about fire might feel prophetic after a house fire occurs, even if the dream was vague and open to many interpretations. This phenomenon, called confirmation bias, plays a significant role in shaping how people perceive precognition. Claims of precognition are inherently difficult to prove or disprove. Scientific evidence remains inconclusive, as studies often produce conflicting results or are plagued by methodological flaws. On the other hand, anecdotal evidence abounds. People often report experiences of déjà vu or vivid dreams that seem to predict future events. However, it's important to remember that there are literally 8 billion people in the world. Every person makes numerous forecasts about the future, either consciously or subconsciously, throughout the day. While it's impossible to quantify how many predictions human brains make per day, it's fairly certain that this number is astronomically high. Statistically, some predictions are bound to come true by chance alone. Rudolf Diesel, the inventor of the diesel engine, vanished under baffling circumstances in 1913. At the height of his career, Diesel boarded a steamship and was never seen alive again. His disappearance on the eve of World War I sparked immediate speculation and debate that continues over a century later. Born in 1858, Rudolf Diesel was a genius engineer, best known for developing the compression-ignition internal combustion engine that bears his name. He envisioned an engine that could deliver unprecedented efficiency compared to the steam engines of the day. Diesel filed his first patent for the engine in 1892, and within a few years he had built successful prototypes. Notably, his design could run on a variety of fuels. An early model even ran on peanut oil, demonstrating the engine's flexibility. This adaptability meant that engine power could reach parts of the world without ready access to coal or petroleum. By 1912, Diesel's invention was a worldwide success, with over 70,000 engines in use globally. Diesel himself became a wealthy and respected figure, celebrated for an innovation that was transforming industry and transportation. On the evening of September 29, 1913, Rudolf Diesel boarded the SS Dresden, a steamship in Antwerp, Belgium, bound for Harwich, England. He planned to attend the opening of a new diesel engine plant and to meet with British Royal Navy officials about installing diesel engines in submarines. Diesel dined on board and retired to his cabin around 10 p.m., asking to be awakened at 6:15 a.m. the next day. That morning, however, he didn't answer his wake-up call. Crew who checked his cabin found it completely empty. Tellingly, the bed had not been slept in, and a clean nightshirt was laid out, while his watch was left on the bedside, as if he had prepared for bed but never actually went to sleep. More ominous clues were found up on deck. Diesel's hat and neatly folded overcoat were discovered beneath the afterdeck railing, near the ship's stern. The ship was searched, but no trace of the missing inventor turned up during the voyage. It appeared that Diesel had gone overboard during the night. Roughly 10 days later, on October 10, 1913, crew on a Dutch vessel in the North Sea came upon a body floating in the water. The corpse was badly decomposed and unrecognizable, so the sailors retrieved personal items from the clothing and returned the body to the sea, as was the style at the time. These recovered belongings were later identified by Diesel's son as items his father carried, providing tragic confirmation that Rudolf Diesel had died at sea. In the days following Diesel's disappearance, puzzling clues emerged about his state of mind and finances. Shortly before his trip, Diesel had given his wife, Martha, a tightly sealed bag with instructions that it not be opened until a week later. After he vanished, Martha opened the parcel and found 20,000 German marks in cash, along with financial statements indicating that the family's bank accounts were nearly empty. Despite Diesel's fame and the commercial success of his engine, He had suffered serious personal financial troubles due to bad investments. It turned out that despite maintaining the image of a wealthy and successful industrialist, he was essentially bankrupt, at least on a personal level. Investigators also learned that in Diesel's diary, a small cross mark had been drawn next to the date September 29, 1913, as if ominously marking it as the day of his death. These revelations painted a picture of a man who might have been planning for the end, and they would heavily influence one of the leading theories about his fate. The world reacted with shock to the news of Diesel's disappearance. Officially, authorities eventually deemed his death a likely self-ending, given the evidence of financial ruin and his last recorded actions. However, the mysterious circumstances, a prominent inventor vanishing from a ship without witnesses, fueled rampant speculation in the press and public. Almost immediately, newspapers offered sensational explanations. But let's discuss what might be the most likely theory first, before we get into those. One straightforward theory is that Rudolf Diesel ended it all by leaping into the sea voluntarily. Proponents of this view point to his dire financial straits and personal issues as compelling motives. The documents found in his wife's keeping showed that Diesel had virtually no money left, which would have been a crushing revelation for a man of his stature. That said, while this is the way the case is reported, I have to question this somewhat. While Rudolf Diesel may have indeed been heavily in debt and virtually bankrupt, relatively speaking, he held extremely valuable patents. And this isn't just speculation. The most powerful navy in the world at the time had called him specifically to discuss implementing his patented technology into their submarines. What I'm saying is that the vast majority of people, even wealthy people, would feel blessed to be this quote-unquote broke. Further, the value of the patents themselves has to also be taken into account. He could have sold the rights to his revolutionary patents and become fabulously wealthy in an instant, given the revolutionary nature of his technology, which he fully owned. All that said, it's entirely possible that Diesel, despite being an engineering genius, wasn't a financial genius and didn't fully understand or realize this. After all, he did manage to lose the vast majority of his wealth due to poor investments in the first place. In addition, Diesel had been suffering from health problems and exhaustion in the years leading up to 1913. Faced with mounting debts and physical ailments, it's plausible he fell into despair. Supporters of the theory also cite the eerie preparation he seemed to make, such as setting out his nightshirt and marking his diary as if anticipating death. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, and Diesel jumping overboard of his own accord is a straightforward narrative. Yet some aspects don't entirely make sense. For instance, why didn't he leave a note behind, or a more direct indication? From the moment Diesel disappeared, theories of foul play have captured the public imagination. One hypothesis centers on German agents or the government of Kaiser Wilhelm II. In 1913, Europe was on the brink of war, and Diesel's inventions had significant military value. Diesel had refused to grant Germany exclusive rights to his engine, and he was heading to England to discuss aiding the British Navy, a potential threat to German naval ambitions. The British Royal Navy was interested in using diesel engines to power its submarines, and Diesel's meeting in London about submarine engines was no secret. This fueled suspicions that German operatives might have removed him to stop Britain from gaining an even more significant naval edge than they already had. And after all, Germany's diesel-powered submarines would end up being essentially the only way Imperial Germany could give the Royal Navy and British commerce a black eye in the war. While this scenario offers a very clear motive, denying Britain a strategic technology, no hard evidence has ever emerged to prove Diesel was slain for military reasons. A more fringe theory suggests that a German nationalist may have taken the matter into his own hands when he saw Diesel on the ship. And yeah, for those of you listening very closely, that was an intentional pun. Under this theory, Rudolf Diesel's working with the British was seen as a betrayal by this unknown assailant, as Diesel was German. Another popular theory, also related to foul play, suggests a slaying by an industrial rival. Rudolf Diesel's engine was revolutionary not just for navies, but also for the energy industry. The diesel engine could run on oils derived from plants as well as petroleum, threatening to upend the fuel status quo. This led some to speculate that powerful oil interests wanted diesel out of the picture. In fact, as early as 1913, the press speculated about conspiracies involving big American oil firms. However, historians and energy experts generally find this theory unconvincing. Diesel engines at that time were mostly used in industrial and marine applications, and there was no infrastructure to mass-produce vegetable oil fuel in competition with petroleum. While processes did exist for creating biodiesel fuels, these wouldn't become economically viable for half a century after the supposed hit. What's also forgotten is that early 20th century oil barons were still profiting from selling diesel fuel, which is itself derived from petroleum. Diesel's invention was actually a significant benefit to the oil business, not a death knell. Other theories have been floated over the last century but haven't gained much traction. Crossing the North Sea in late September could be perilous, and it's conceivable that Diesel simply fell overboard. Perhaps he decided to take a stroll on the moonlit deck to clear his head and lost his footing, tumbling into the cold water below. Diesel was known to have health issues. It's possible he suffered a dizzy spell, heart attack, or stroke that caused him to fall from the ship by accident. Supporters of the accident theory point out that no evidence of foul play was found at the scene. His belongings were left undisturbed, and there were no signs of a fight. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. Also, I haven't mentioned it in a while, but if you want a shout out or to just help out even more, you can join up on the Patreon or YouTube membership for as little as $1 a month. The Kerguelen Plateau, located in the southern Indian Ocean, is a vast underwater volcanic plateau. Spanning approximately 500,000 square miles, it's one of the world's largest submerged land masses. Over the years, scientists have debated whether this plateau could be considered a lost continent. The Kerguelen Plateau was formed by volcanic activity associated with the Kerguelen hotspot, beginning around 130 million years ago during the early Cretaceous period. This hotspot led to extensive basaltic lava flows, creating a large igneous area that includes the Kerguelen Plateau and the Broken Ridge. Initially, parts of the plateau were above sea level, forming a substantial landmass. Geological evidence suggests that the plateau experienced multiple phases of volcanic activity, contributing to its complex structure. Over time, the Kerguelen Plateau underwent significant subsidence, leading to its current submerged state. Today, most of the plateau lies beneath 3,000 to 6,000 feet of water, with only a few islands, such as the Kerguelen Islands and Heard Island, remaining above sea level. The submersion is attributed to a combination of factors, including the cooling of the lithosphere, as well as possible tectonic movements. Several lines of evidence have led scientists to consider the Kerguelen Plateau as a potential lost continent. Studies have identified rocks on the plateau that are typically associated with continental crust, such as granites. These findings suggest that parts of the plateau may have originated from continental material. Further, fossil discoveries, including those of ancient coniferous trees, indicate that the plateau once supported terrestrial ecosystems. This supports the idea that substantial portions of the plateau were above sea level and possibly connected to other land masses, facilitating the migration of species. Further yet, the composition of sedimentary rocks found on the plateau shows similarities to those in regions like India and Australia. This suggests that the plateau was once part of the supercontinent Gondwana. As Gondwana fragmented, the plateau became isolated and eventually submerged, which would make it at the very least a microcontinent. Despite the supporting evidence, there are arguments against classifying the Kerguelen Plateau as a lost continent. While there are indications of continental material, much of the plateau is composed of basaltic rock typical of oceanic crust. This suggests that the plateau may not meet the criteria of a true continent, which is primarily composed of continental crust. Also, the definition of a continent typically includes considerations of size, elevation, and the presence of a distinct continental shelf. While the Kerguelen Plateau is extensive, its predominantly submerged state and geological composition may exclude it from being classified as a true continent. There's a popular claim circulating on the internet that human kidneys have moved to a different location in the body. People who believe this assert that kidneys used to be located in the lower back, near the waist, but now appear higher up under the rib cage. This idea often crops up as a so-called Mandela effect example, a collective false memory of something that never actually changed. In reality, the position of the kidneys in human anatomy has not changed at all. The confusion arises from misremembering and misinformation, not any real physical relocation of our organs. The anatomical reality is that human kidneys have a fixed, well-documented position in the body. They reside high in the abdominal cavity toward the back. Specifically, each kidney sits on either side of the spine, approximately between the levels of the 12th thoracic and 3rd lumbar vertebrae in the backbone. In simple terms, your kidneys are roughly midway up your back, just below your rib cage. The left kidney is normally slightly higher than the right one, because the liver occupies space on the right side above the kidney. Each kidney lies deep against the rear abdominal wall, nestled in a cushion of fat, which honestly sounds super comfy. But all this leads to the obvious question. If the kidneys have always been high in the back, why do so many people recall them being down closer to the waist? Several factors likely contribute to this widespread misbelief. One major reason is the way we talk about and feel pain in that area. People often associate any lower back ache with kidney pain, and it's common to hear someone say, "My kidneys hurt," when experiencing pain near the belt line. In reality, true kidney pain, for example, from a kidney infection or kidney stones, usually presents in the flank, which is the area on the sides of your mid-back just under the ribs. Often, when someone has pain in the lower back, it's muscular or spinal, not coming from the kidneys at all. However, because we casually refer to the general area in relation to kidney pain, it can create a mental image that the kidneys must be located there. This is essentially an illusion of the language we use. Media and pop culture have also reinforced the idea of kidneys being way lower down than they actually are. In boxing or action movies, a punch to the lower back or abdominal area is generally referred to as a kidney punch. This term exists because a blow to that region can indeed jostle the kidneys, which are just above the hips, toward the back. Therefore, hearing a fighter was just hit with a kidney punch may lead you to believe that the kidneys have sustained a direct hit with the so-called kidney punch. And here's where I have a confession. Before I did research into this topic, I thought that's where the kidneys were as well. I'm gonna blame years of watching boxing and mixed martial arts for that, rather than the Mandela effect. Another source of confusion comes from medical procedures and discussions that are easily misunderstood. A notable example is kidney transplantation. In a kidney transplant surgery, surgeons don't put the new kidney in the exact spot where the original kidneys are. Instead, the donated kidney is placed in the lower abdomen, since it's easier to connect it to blood vessels and the bladder in that location. Importantly, the patient's own kidneys are usually not removed during a transplant unless medically necessary, meaning the original kidneys often stay in their normal position. Again, confession time, this isn't something I knew before researching this topic, and I now feel surprisingly knowledgeable about these important organs. So yeah, I'm just going to come out and say it here. Take care of your kidneys, folks. The kidney Mandela effect is one of the most fascinating Mandela effects I've come across because it's actually kind of plausible at first glance. There's so much evidence to suggest that kidneys really aren't where you remembered them, from the transplants to the kidney punches. And yeah, as a quick aside, if you get a kidney transplant and you take a kidney punch, you're literally taking a punch to your transplanted kidney. For as long as humanity has pondered the cosmos, we have asked not only how the universe began, but also how it might end. Modern cosmology has transformed this ancient curiosity into a scientific inquiry. Ever since Edwin Hubble's 1929 discovery that galaxies are rushing apart, scientists have debated what the ultimate fate of that expansion is. One long-standing hypothesis for the end of the universe is the Big Crunch, essentially the reverse of the Big Bang. In this scenario, gravity's pull eventually overcomes the outward momentum of expansion, causing the cosmos to stop expanding and begin collapsing inward. If the universe's average density is above a certain critical density, gravity will gradually halt the expansion, much like Earth's gravity can slow a thrown ball to a stop and pull it back down. The expansion would then reverse, with galaxies accelerating back toward one another. Over an immense timescale, all matter might coalesce, and the universe would shrivel to an extremely hot, dense state, essentially the Big Bang in reverse. Importantly, current evidence suggests that a big crunch is unlikely given our universe's parameters. Decades ago, it was reasonable to think gravity might eventually win and trigger a collapse, but the discovery of cosmic acceleration in 1998 upended that expectation. The universe appears to be flat or open, not closed, and dominated by dark energy, so there may simply not be enough matter or pull to ever reverse the expansion. While the Big Crunch cannot be entirely ruled out, all measurements to date point away from this fate. Another radical end-of-universe scenario is the Big Rip, in which the expansion of the universe accelerates so ferociously that it literally rips apart all structures. This idea arises from a particular type of dark energy or something even stranger. In our current universe, dark energy is thought to be causing accelerated expansion, but at a relatively steady rate. In a Big Rip scenario, galaxies, stars, planets, and eventually atoms themselves would be torn apart as space-time expands at an ever-increasing pace. Essentially, even the gravitational and molecular bonds holding objects together would be overcome by the accelerating stretch of space. One by one, first galaxy clusters, then galaxies, then solar systems would be pulled apart. Finally, in the last moments before the end, atoms and subatomic particles would be shredded when the expansion becomes infinitely rapid. At that instant, the universe would become a featureless, infinitely expanding void, effectively a singularity of expansion. This violent end is, fortunately, not the most likely scenario according to most experts. The Big Rip requires a form of energy that violates certain energy conditions in physics, and it doesn't fit well with current observations. Among all the scenarios, the heat death of the universe, also known as the Big Freeze or Big Chill, is currently considered the most likely fate by many cosmologists. Unlike the sudden drama of a Big Rip or Big Crunch, heat death is a far more gradual process without any observable conclusion. In this scenario, the universe continues to expand forever, and in doing so, it ages into a state of utter exhaustion. Over extremely long timescales, all sources of usable energy are depleted. Stars burn through their fuel and wink out. Galaxies slow their star formation until no new stars are born. Even black holes, the last bastions of mass, evaporate via Hawking radiation. The cosmos heads toward a state of maximum entropy from which it can never recover. In thermodynamics, the second law states that the total entropy of a closed system never decreases, and the universe as a whole meets the definition of a closed system. Heat death gets its name because ultimately all heat dissipates. Everything becomes spread thinly and evenly across space, reaching an extremely low, nearly unchanging temperature. In this frigid cosmos, no complex structures can survive, as no free energy is available to sustain processes like life or motion. It is, in effect, the end of everything that has ever existed. Time itself becomes meaningless on a grand scale, because nothing changes or can happen when the cosmos is in thermodynamic equilibrium. Physicists sometimes say that in a heat death, the arrow of time, defined by growing entropy, would stand still once entropy can increase no further. Current observations favor this big freeze outcome because our universe's expansion appears destined to continue indefinitely. Contemplating the end of the universe inevitably raises profound existential and philosophical questions. Each of these cosmic finale scenarios carries implications for how we find meaning in a cosmos which inevitably ends. The notion of heat death, for instance, has been called perhaps the most depressing scientific idea ever formulated. It foresees a future in which life anywhere in the universe is ultimately doomed to extinction as usable energy runs out. All achievements, creations, and even knowledge itself would eventually be annihilated, reduced to an inanimate, undifferentiated cold mist. This can lead to a sense of cosmic futility and the feeling that if nothing endures, does anything we do now ultimately matter? Philosophers have grappled with this question, often arriving at different emotional responses. Some respond with despair or existential dread, while others find it a call to focus on the present and on creating meaning now, rather than in some far-off forever. Interestingly, not everyone is frightened or saddened by the universe's eventual demise. Some philosophers and cosmologists take a rather stoic or even humorous view of it. After all, if nothing in life really matters, then you get to create your own meaning and define your own destiny. You get to define what success means to you. And whether that's producing YouTube videos every day of your life or being the best at Hello Kitty Island Adventure, the goals are defined by you. Or to put it in more visual terms, just take a look at the image on your screen right now and let that sink in. Mystery meat is a term used to describe meat products of ambiguous composition, appearance, or origin, often served in institutional settings such as school cafeterias, hospitals, or prisons. The term typically invokes the idea that the diner cannot readily identify the type of meat they are eating, whether it's beef, pork, chicken, or a blend of several animal sources. Historically, mystery meat gained prominence in mid-20th century American popular culture. It appeared in jokes about cafeteria meals, military ration kits, and cheap diners serving patrons questionable meals. The foods that fit into this category are often highly processed, heavily seasoned, and presented in forms like patties, nuggets, or loaves that obscure their actual ingredients. For example, certain forms of processed lunch meat, canned meat products, and low-quality sausages have sometimes been labeled mystery meat. The concept has spawned a variety of urban legends about what exactly might be lurking in these unidentifiable slabs of quote-unquote protein. These tales, often exchanged in whispered tones among students in lunch lines or passed along through social media, evoke a shared anxiety about a lack of transparency in our food system. One of the most persistent urban legends is the idea that school cafeterias or fast food chains rely on substandard ingredients, such as ground up rats, pigeons, or other vermin. This story often circulates without solid evidence, fueled primarily by the anxiety that large institutions are willing to cut corners to save money. However, government inspectors regularly monitor meat plants and food service providers to ensure compliance with sanitation and safety standards. This, of course, makes the intentional inclusion of such repulsive ingredients both illegal and highly unlikely. While isolated cases of contamination can occur, the likelihood that any major institution would knowingly serve rodent meat as a substitute for beef or chicken is virtually non-existent. Also, I haven't done the math on this, but I'm reasonably certain factory farming has made rodent meat more expensive than chicken. Another class of legends involves the notion that school lunch meats, particularly in underfunded school districts, contain large percentages of non-meat fillers. These ingredients, such as soy, cereal grains, or other plant byproducts, make the meat look very off, giving rise to the suspicion that what appears to be meat might be something else entirely. Michael Rockefeller was the 23-year-old son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and a member of one of America's most prominent and influential families. In 1961, during a trip to what was then Dutch New Guinea, he disappeared under mysterious circumstances, sparking global intrigue that continues to this day. Although Michael's family connections opened countless doors, Michael was known for having a genuine curiosity about people from other cultures. He'd studied at Harvard University, where he developed a particular interest in anthropology and the arts of non-Western societies. Following his graduation in 1960, Michael decided to pursue that passion in earnest. He became involved with the Peabody Museum's Harvard Peabody New Guinea expedition, which focused on documenting and studying the art and culture of the Asmat people. Asmat are indigenous to southwestern New Guinea, a region known for its dense rainforests, intricate carving traditions, and, at that time, minimal outside influence. Michael was especially captivated by Asmat art, wooden carvings and sculptures that were integral to their spiritual and cultural practices. The Asmat region was remote and challenging to navigate, with thick swamps, frequent flooding, and virtually no modern amenities. Michael Rockefeller was undeterred by these difficulties and was determined to collect artifacts that would eventually be displayed in his father's Museum of Primitive Art in New York. During one of his expeditions in 1961, Michael and anthropologist Renee Wassing traveled down a major river in a dugout canoe. This trip would ultimately be his last. On November 17th, near the mouth of a river running into the Arafura Sea, their canoe was swamped and overturned. Michael, Renee Wassing, and two local guides clung to the overturned vessel. When it became evident they were drifting farther away from the shore, Michael allegedly said something akin to, "I think I can make it," and he swam off in search of help. The guides and Renee Wassing were later rescued, but Michael was never seen again. When news reached Dutch authorities and local inhabitants that Michael had vanished, a massive search commenced. Helicopters, airplanes, and patrol boats scoured the coastline, while local tribespeople helped comb the thick jungles. And yeah, let's just be clear here. Michael's powerful family connections meant that no expense was spared in the efforts to find him. For weeks, the search turned up little more than rumors. Dutch officials eventually determined that Michael had likely drowned or been attacked by sharks in the choppy waters. On November 24, 1961, the official declaration was that Michael Rockefeller was presumed dead. Even as Dutch authorities concluded their search, theories were already circulating about what might have really happened to Michael. One of the most persistent rumors is that he made it to shore, only to be slain and potentially consumed by local tribesmen. This practice had historically been practiced in the Asmat region, though Dutch pacification efforts had largely reduced these rituals by the 1960s. Still, tales related to this sort of activity, especially involving a Rockefeller, seize the global imagination. Over the years, various explorers and writers have claimed to uncover new evidence supporting this theory. Some accounts reference alleged confessions from Asmat tribespeople, while others cite hearsay or secondhand stories passed down locally. Critics point out that most of these claims come from sensationalized sources or lack concrete proof. Bones or remains that could be definitively identified as Michael's have never been found. Another theory claims that Michael survived and chose to or was forced to live among the Asmat and remained there in secrecy. Though this idea is often dismissed as far-fetched, the concept of Westerners going native and leaving behind modernity is something that has historically occurred on occasion. One photograph purports to show a white man living amongst the Asmat, rowing a boat alongside his fellow tribesmen. And yes, you may want to look at the screen and see what you think of this picture. I think the likely best explanation may be that the man depicted is simply a massive outlier in terms of skin pigmentation, but there's always the possibility that this does depict Michael. Still, despite all this, no verified sightings of Michael have ever been documented. In the decades following Michael's disappearance, investigative journalists, explorers, and even some family associates have revisited the Asmat region. Perhaps the most notable was journalist Milt Macklin, who conducted an in-depth investigation in the 1960s, traveling to the area and interviewing locals. Macklin uncovered stories that seemed to point to Michael being slain by tribesmen, but he never found definitive proof. Also, full disclosure, Macklin is best known for his work surrounding the Bermuda Triangle, so he may have had a slight flair for sensationalism. In 2014, writer Carl Hoffman published Savage Harvest, which reignited public interest by presenting evidence that Michael was indeed slain as part of a revenge ritual. According to Hoffman, Michael was mistaken as a representative of the Dutch colonial regime. However, Hoffman's claims rely heavily on hearsay and questionable first-hand accounts from people who were speaking of events generations ago. The Rockefeller family has, for the most part, maintained privacy regarding Michael's fate. Nelson Rockefeller rarely spoke publicly about his son's disappearance, and official statements have never ventured beyond the conclusion that Michael was presumed drowned. For some, the lack of public family involvement only adds to the mystery. This has led theorists to wonder if they knew Michael wanted to get away from his privileged life and live with the Asmat. And if I haven't been very clear about this thus far, Michael Rockefeller was legitimately passionate about the Asmat and their art and culture, and wanted to experience it all firsthand. Though Michael Rockefeller's disappearance will probably never be fully resolved, his legacy lives on through the art he collected and the interest he sparked in the Asmat region. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. You guys sharing my videos has helped my channel grow so much lately, so I just want to take a quick moment to say thanks. In March 1898, the British Empire began constructing a railway bridge over the Tsavo River in present-day Kenya, a project meant to connect Uganda's interior to the Indian Ocean. What should have been a straightforward engineering feat, however, devolved into a 9-month nightmare when 2 male lions began systematically hunting and devouring the workers. Dubbed the Tsavo man-eaters, these lions became infamous for their boldness, intelligence, and unprecedented focus on humans as prey. Their story, an ecological mystery, remains one of the most chilling examples of human-wildlife conflict. The Tsavo region, a sprawling wilderness of thorny scrubland and rocky outcrops, was, and still is, a harsh ecosystem teeming with wildlife. For the British, building the Uganda Railway through this terrain was a strategic move to consolidate economic and political control over East Africa. Thousands of Indian laborers and local African workers were recruited for the project, which required backbreaking labor under extreme conditions. The railway's progress, however, came to an abrupt halt in late 1898, when the Lions began their attacks. Workers initially dismissed the disappearances, blaming them on desertions, or the much more routine crocodile attacks they'd become accustomed to. But as bodies were discovered near campfires and tents, panic set in as it became clear that lions were responsible for these events. The lions, unlike typical predators, showed no fear of humans. They tore through flimsy barriers, dragged victims from tents, and even prowled the workers' campsites in daylight. By December 1898, the death toll had risen so sharply that construction halted entirely. Workers fled, and the project's chief engineer, Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, found himself tasked with not just a building project, but stopping these beasts. Patterson, an experienced big game hunter, initially underestimated the lions. He set traps and ambushes, but the lions seemed to evade them with eerie precision. In his memoir, The Man-Eaters of Tsavo, he described their, quote, uncanny shrewdness and almost supernatural ability to avoid danger. The attacks were gruesomely methodical. The lions rarely ate their victims entirely, often abandoning half-eaten bodies near the camp, a behavior that fueled speculation about their motives. Some workers believed the lions were evil spirits or creatures summoned by powerful magicians employed by tribes who opposed the railway. Patterson, however, recognized the predators were likely driven by opportunity. With the railway disrupting their habitat and traditional prey diminished by drought or disease, humans, largely unarmed and concentrated in camps, became easy targets. After numerous failed attempts, Patterson eliminated the first lion on December 9, 1898, and the second 3 weeks later. He recounted that the first lion measured nearly 9 feet long and required 8 shots to bring down. The second, shot after a tense pursuit, was similarly massive. Their manelessness, a common trait among Tsavo lions, added to their somewhat disturbing appearance. The exact number of victims of these creatures remains debated. Patterson claimed 135 deaths, but modern scholars suggest a more conservative estimate of 35. This discrepancy might stem from Patterson exaggerating for dramatic effect or conflating lion-related deaths with those from other causes. Regardless, the attacks were unprecedented in scale. And of course, the other mystery at play here is, why did these lions target humans? One theory, which I very briefly mentioned previously, points to environmental stress. The 1890s saw severe droughts and a rinderpest epidemic that decimated buffalo and other prey. With natural food sources scarce, the lions may have turned to humans as a readily available alternative. Another popular theory is based on dental evidence. One lion had a broken canine and an abscess, which would have made hunting large, struggling prey painful. We humans aren't known for our thick hides, which leaves us comparatively defenseless, even to a lion in need of serious dental intervention. Another factor that can't be overlooked was the railway itself. The construction disrupted the lions' territory, forcing them into closer contact with humans. The camps, with their noise and activity, likely desensitized the lions to human presence, eroding their instinctive caution. Along with this, these two lions wouldn't have had the manpower, or perhaps more accurately, lion power, to go up against an established pride of lions. And I'm saying this as someone who's watched all the Lion King films at least once. So yeah, you could say I'm something of an authority on the matter. The Tsavo man-eaters' story didn't end with their deaths. Interestingly, Patterson had used their pelts as rugs, in a Genghis Khan-like display of force to other lions who may have thought about crossing his path. After a few decades adorning his floor, Patterson decided to sell the lion remains to the Field Museum in Chicago, where they remain on display today. Their reconstructed forms, though lacking the menace of life, serve as a haunting reminder of their reign of terror. So there's a 1996 film based on this event starring Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas that I've been meaning to watch. Unfortunately, I can't give you guys a movie review here since I haven't actually watched it, but let me know in the comments if you have, and if it's worth it or not. Hanako-san is a very prominent figure in Japanese urban folklore. This legend tells of the spirit of a girl named Hanako who haunts school bathrooms across Japan. The tale has become deeply ingrained in Japanese culture, especially among school children, and has been depicted in various media forms. The legend of Hanako-san dates back to the 1950s. According to the story, Hanako-san is the ghost of a young girl who resides in the third stall of the girls' bathroom, typically on the third floor of a school building. To summon her, one must knock 3 times on the stall door and ask, "Hanako-san, are you there?" If she is present, she responds with, "Yes, I am." Upon opening the stall door, witnesses might see a young girl with a bobbed haircut, wearing a red skirt or dress. In some versions of the tale, Hanako-san's appearance is accompanied by a bloody or ghostly hand, and she may pull the individual into the toilet, leading them to hell. Alternatively, the person might be eaten by a 3-headed lizard, claiming that they invaded Hanako's privacy. The origins of Hanako-san's spirit vary across different accounts. In one version, she was a child during the war who hid in the school bathroom during an air raid and tragically perished. Another rendition suggests she was slain by a stranger in the third stall of a third-floor bathroom. Yet another version claims she rendered herself the opposite of alive in, you guessed it, a third stall of a third-floor bathroom. Hanako-san's legend has become a widespread phenomenon in Japanese schools. Children often challenge each other to summon her, turning the tale into a test of courage in a way equivalent to summoning Bloody Mary. This practice has cemented Hanako-san's status as a fixture of Japanese urban folklore over the past 70 years. The legend of Hanako-san has also permeated popular culture. She's been depicted in various films, manga, anime, and video games, with perhaps the most famous iteration being the manga series, Toilet-Bound Hanako-kun, which gender swaps her. On the night of January 27, 1976, 22-year-old Kyle Clinkscales, a junior at Auburn University and part-time bartender at the Moose Club in LaGrange, Georgia, left work around 11 p.m. He had intended to make the routine 35-mile drive back to campus where he lived. He never arrived, and neither he nor his 1974 white Ford Pinto were seen again for decades. Initially, Kyle's parents, John and Louise Clinkscales, didn't realize their son was missing. It wasn't until the following Sunday, when Kyle failed to make his routine weekly call, that concern set in. They visited his apartment in Auburn, only to learn from his roommate that Kyle hadn't been home since that Tuesday night. Alarmed, they reported him missing to both Auburn and LaGrange police departments. In the early stages of the investigation, authorities considered the possibility that Kyle had left voluntarily. He had faced academic challenges, having previously dropped out of another institution before enrolling at Auburn. However, as days turned into weeks with no word from him, the theory of foul play gained traction. Over the years, various leads emerged, but none brought closure. In 1981, a man claiming to be Kyle surfaced, alleging he had suffered from amnesia following a car accident in 1976. While his handwriting bore similarities to Kyle's, dental records ultimately disproved his claim. And damn, I mean, the level of cruelty involved in pulling off a hoax like that is almost unfathomable. A significant development occurred in 1987 when a man walking his dogs along Flat Shoal Creek, south of LaGrange, discovered Kyle's credit card in excellent condition. Notably, the card had expired in 1973, 3 years before Kyle's disappearance, which raised some questions. However, his parents were able to recall that his wallet had been stolen in 1973. Investigators speculated that the card might have originated from that theft, offering no substantial clues to his whereabouts. In 2005, fresh information led to the arrest of two individuals. A man came forward, stating that at the age of 7, he had witnessed the disposal of Kyle's body. He implicated Ray Hyde, a member of the Moose Club and now deceased, as the perpetrator. According to the witness, Kyle's body had been concealed in a barrel, covered with concrete, and dumped in a private pond. This revelation resulted in the arrests of two living individuals on charges related to concealing a death and making false statements. However, inconsistencies in the narrative led authorities to question the whole thing, and no concrete evidence was found to substantiate any of the claims made. Charges were subsequently dropped due to this lack of evidence. A breakthrough came on December 7, 2021, when a passerby noticed a submerged vehicle in a creek in Cusseta, Alabama. Upon retrieval, the car was identified as Kyle's 1974 Ford Pinto through its license plate and VIN. Inside, investigators found his wallet, credit card, and human remains. In February 2023, DNA testing confirmed that the remains were indeed Kyle's. Despite this discovery, the cause of his death remains undetermined due to the condition of the remains after decades underwater. Naturally, this has given rise to numerous theories regarding what happened to him. One of the most straightforward theories is that Kyle accidentally drove his 1974 Ford Pinto off the road and into the creek, where it was eventually found. It's possible Kyle was simply exhausted after finishing his shift at the Moose Club, lost control of the vehicle on a dark stretch of road, and veered into the water. This explanation aligns with the fact that his car and remains were eventually discovered submerged in a creek. If he became trapped or was injured on impact, he may not have been able to escape. Mechanical failure, low visibility, or even a sudden obstacle could have contributed to a fatal accident. For many years, theories of foul play were prevalent, so much so that in 2005, two individuals were arrested in connection with his alleged slaying. This line of thinking goes that Kyle might have crossed paths with someone, potentially connected with the Moose Club or elsewhere, who had a motive to harm him. The witness who claimed to have seen Kyle's body being disposed of described a more elaborate scenario involving a barrel and concrete, but that story was proven to be fiction by the 2021 find. Still, some wonder if Kyle was forced off the road or slain elsewhere, with the car then staged in the creek as a cover-up. Many people are surprised to learn that a familiar logo from their childhood isn't quite what they remember. Perhaps the most striking example is the Fruit of the Loom logo. If you ask around, most people will insist that this classic clothing brand's logo once featured a cornucopia, or horn of plenty, behind the pile of fruit. There's only one problem. No official Fruit of the Loom logo has ever contained a cornucopia. This widespread collective false memory is a textbook case of the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where large groups of people share the same mistaken memory. Fruit of the Loom is a brand with a long history, and its logo has evolved over more than a century. The company's origins date back to 1851, and it officially registered its trademark 20 years later, making it one of the oldest brand trademarks still active today. From the very beginning, fruit imagery was at the heart of the brand's identity. According to company lore, the name Fruit of the Loom was inspired by a painting of fruits made by the daughter of a shopkeeper who sold the company's textiles. But who knows if that's actually true or just public relations talk to make a corporation look more folksy and relatable to consumers. The original Fruit of the Loom logo, introduced in the late 1800s, featured a colorful still life of fruits. This early logo depicted a red apple, green and purple grapes, and perhaps some smaller berries or currants, usually shown with green leaves. Throughout the 20th century, Fruit of the Loom updated its logo multiple times. For example, by the 1920s and 1930s, the logo had been refined. One version placed the fruits inside an oval shape, and later versions used a circular seal or emblem style. And yeah, just my personal view here, but this was a low point for the company in terms of aesthetics. The fruits themselves were redrawn in various styles. Some versions in the mid-20th century looked three-dimensional and shaded, while later ones became flatter and more graphic. In the 1960s, the company simplified the logo for a much cleaner look. By 1978, the logo still featured the same fruits, but with fewer highlights and a more streamlined appearance of the text. The most significant modernization came in 2003, when Fruit of the Loom introduced a new, contemporary logo design. This current logo, which is still in use today, places the familiar fruits front and center on a clean, white or transparent background with no enclosing shape. The fruit drawing was simplified into bold, solid colors, suitable for digital printing, and the company name is written in a modern, easy-to-read font beneath the image. Despite these changes over the decades, one thing stayed consistent in every official iteration of the logo. There was never a cornucopia or basket depicted behind the fruit. The fruits have always appeared either freestanding or on a plain background. Fruit of the Loom itself has confirmed this history. In response to the growing confusion, the company released a visual timeline of all its logos from the first design in 1893 to the present, showing each redesign. Nowhere in that official timeline is there any horn-shaped basket. Only the fruit cluster appears in each version. Fact-checkers have also scoured old advertisements and trademark filings from the 1800s onward, and found that every authentic logo shows the fruit without a cornucopia. In short, the logo's evolution has been thoroughly documented, and at no point was a cornucopia part of the real design. So that brings us to the obvious question. If a cornucopia never existed in the Fruit of the Loom logo, why do so many people remember it so clearly? The belief in the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia is astonishingly widespread. It's not just a handful of people with hazy memories. It's a large number of individuals, across different ages and backgrounds, who will confidently describe the logo as a heap of fruit spilling out of a woven cornucopia. Personally, I remember finding out what a cornucopia was when I asked my mom what the thing behind the fruit was on the logo. This is a memory that's as clear as day. It happened in the Canadian equivalent of a TJ Maxx. While most Mandela effects have easy explanations that are simply explained by minor false memories, the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia hits differently for most people. And there's even evidence for it from before the Mandela effect became a thing. Look at this still from the 2005 movie called The Ant Bully. That's a very clear cornucopia right behind the fruit, just like we all remember it. Additionally, it's also highly unusual that everyone seems to remember the exact same cornucopia. Given that no cornucopia was ever part of the official logo, what could explain why so many of us remember one? The only logical explanation is that a bunch of us are from the cornucopia universe. But seriously, I just can't explain this one at all. Are we all the victims of the most genius long play marketing campaign ever? Or is there something more at play? Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. My channel is powered by all the support I get from you watching, sharing, and hitting the like button on each video I publish. On March 24, 1994, the life of 26-year-old Matt Flores was abruptly cut short in a seemingly random act of violence. Matthew Donald Flores was known as a dedicated family man and a hard-working professional. He had recently left the military life behind and was starting a new chapter at Applied Materials, a well-known technology company in Silicon Valley. Alongside his wife Denise and their newborn daughter Danielle, Matt envisioned a future filled with hope and stability. On that March morning in 1994, Matt Flores arrived at work just like any other day. It was his 9th day on the job at Applied Materials, and he had parked his rented white Chevy Corsica in the middle of the lot. Witnesses later recalled that the parking lot was busy, with roughly 20 people present at the time. Despite the bustle of activity, no one noticed anything amiss until a single shot shattered the calm. According to police reports, the shot came from behind and struck Matt in the head at point-blank range. The violence of the act was underscored by the fact that his death was almost instantaneous, leaving him with no chance to react or defend himself. A nearby witness, who had been listening to a talk show in her car, was the one who discovered his body and alerted authorities immediately. The sudden and public nature of the slaying left many onlookers and responders in shock. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do for Matt. Despite the large number of witnesses, the investigation into Matt Flores' slaying was complicated by the fact that the fatal moment occurred in a blind spot of the available cameras. However, investigators did have a crucial lead: a short clip from a camera that captured the arrival and departure of an unidentified vehicle in the parking lot. This vehicle, a two-door Ford Explorer with distinctive black trim on its lower panels, was seen entering the lot approximately 20 minutes before the shooting. The footage indicated that the Explorer had been following another car, one that bore a resemblance to Matt's rental vehicle. Moments later, and again before the shooting, the Explorer re-entered the lot in the direction of where the shooting occurred. Within seconds of the fatal moment, the Explorer was seen leaving the scene. This evidence led the police to consider the possibility that the shooter was not targeting Matt Flores specifically, but might have been aiming for someone else who was driving a similar car. The theory of mistaken identity quickly emerged as one of the leading hypotheses in the case. The slaying of Matt Flores has given rise to several theories over the years, each attempting to explain why a man with no known enemies and a promising future would be singled out. As briefly discussed a moment ago, one of the primary theories is that it was a case of mistaken identity. Investigators believe that the assailant might have been following another individual who drove a car similar to the one Matt was using. Another theory suggests that the slaying may have been a professional job. Some speculate that there could have been a connection between Flores' recent military service and his new career in Silicon Valley. Some even suggest that the slaying was linked to a disgruntled co-worker or some other rival, though there is no concrete evidence whatsoever to support these claims. There is also the possibility that the act resulted from an act of road rage or a personal dispute that escalated unexpectedly. Under this theory, Matt may not have been the one who was actually involved in the incident even, with the suggestion being that it was again a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps the most disturbing suggestion of all is that the whole thing may have been completely random. This theory suggests that the perpetrator may have simply woken up that morning and set out to do an evil act such as this. However, despite all the speculation, the case went cold, and authorities have been very tight-lipped about any potential leads in this case. That said, the reissuance of a $100,000 reward in 2016, for instance, was a clear sign that authorities still believed in the possibility of uncovering new evidence. Henry Hudson's disappearance in the early 17th century remains one of history's most intriguing maritime mysteries. Hudson was a renowned English navigator who ventured into uncharted waters during the Age of Exploration. He made significant discoveries in North America, yet his final voyage ended in mutiny and an uncertain fate. Before his ill-fated final voyage, Henry Hudson had already made three notable expeditions. In 1607 and 1608, sailing for English merchants, he attempted to find a northeast passage to Asia across the Arctic, but each time his path was blocked by impenetrable ice. In 1609, now backed by the Dutch East India Company, Hudson turned westward in search of a northwest passage. He crossed the Atlantic and explored the North American coast, venturing into present-day Chesapeake Bay and Delaware Bay. He then sailed up a great river in what would later be New York. That river would later be named the Hudson River in his honor. Although he never did find a new route to Asia, Hudson became the first European to map the Hudson River, and he claimed the surrounding territory for the Netherlands. This achievement cemented his reputation as an accomplished explorer. News of Hudson's discoveries soon made him a figure of keen interest in England. Determined not to lose such a talented explorer to a rival nation, English investors quickly arranged a new expedition for Hudson under their flag. In 1610, with the backing of the Virginia Company and the British East India Company, Henry Hudson set sail once more, a voyage that would tragically be his last. Hudson's final expedition departed England in April 1610 aboard the ship Discovery. He led a crew of about 24 men, including his teenage son John. Their goal was to locate a westward route to Asia through the Arctic waters of North America. By midsummer 1610, Hudson navigated Discovery through the icy channel now known as Hudson Strait, at the northern tip of Labrador, and entered a vast inland sea. This was Hudson's first view of what would later be called Hudson Bay. And yeah, if you haven't gathered it by now, this guy was kind of a big deal in terms of exploration. Believing this enormous bay might be the long-sought Pacific Passage, Hudson eagerly charted its coastline for months. As autumn set in without any sign of an outlet to the Pacific, the realization dawned that the bay was landlocked. In November, the Discovery became trapped by thick ice in the far south of Hudson Bay, near James Bay. Hudson and his crew were forced to winter in the unforgiving wilderness. The crew's situation over the winter of 1610 to 1611 was dire. They hauled the ship ashore and hunkered down on the desolate coast to wait for spring. Freezing temperatures, dwindling food supplies, and outbreaks of scurvy tormented the men. Morale plummeted as the starving crew grew increasingly resentful, blaming Hudson's relentless quest for a passage for their misery. By the time the ice began to thaw in June 1611, many of the men were weak, desperate, and ready to return home at any cost. Hudson, however, was not ready to abandon his mission and apparently had little to no ability to read the room, or read the deck as the situation may have been. Even after the horrible winter, he wanted to continue exploring westward once the bay cleared of ice. Most of his crew vehemently disagreed. They demanded to sail back to England immediately. This clash set the stage for a mutiny. On June 22, 1611, as the Discovery prepared to get underway, the disgruntled crew seized their chance to rebel. The mutineers took control of the ship and overpowered those still loyal to the captain. In the aftermath of the mutiny, the mutineers cast Henry Hudson, his son John, and a handful of loyal crew adrift in a small open boat. The rebels supplied the castaways with only minimal provisions and then cut the rope, leaving them behind in the middle of Hudson Bay. And yes, it feels odd to say they left Henry Hudson in the middle of Hudson Bay, but it is what it is. Hudson and the 8 others with him in that tiny boat were never seen again. As Hudson's abandoned boat faded from view, the Discovery, now under the mutineers' command, set sail for England. The Discovery reached England later that year, with only 8 crewmen remaining. The survivors were arrested and put on trial for the slaying of Henry Hudson, but in the end, none were punished due to lack of proof and conflicting testimonies. To put it simply, the seamen were all over the place, and no one wanted to deal with cleaning up that mess. The mutineers claimed they had simply marooned their captain, not snuffed him out. With Hudson himself missing and unable to tell his side of the story, the true events of the mutiny remained murky. What ultimately happened to Henry Hudson and the men set adrift with him remained an open question that would haunt history. The mystery of Henry Hudson's disappearance has spawned numerous theories about what happened after he was cast adrift. Because no definitive evidence of Hudson or his crew was ever found, historians and adventurers have hypothesized several possible fates. One theory suggests Hudson was never actually set adrift at all, but rather he was slain by the mutineers during the takeover. Some very suspicious evidence was noted when the Discovery returned. For instance, there were bloodstains on the deck that no one seemed to have an explanation for. And I really have to question why these seamen couldn't think up a plausible excuse for the stains during their months-long voyage back to the homeland. After all, the forensic technology at the time was, well, let's just call it limited. It's possible the mutineers concocted the story of setting Hudson loose to hide the true story. However, without bodies or eyewitnesses beyond the mutineers themselves, this theory remains speculative. Other theories propose that Hudson and his companions survived for a time after being marooned. Given their proximity to land, they might have reached the shores of James Bay. In fact, years later in 1631, explorer Thomas James reported finding the remains of a crude shelter on an island in James Bay, perhaps built by Hudson's stranded party. Some believe the castaways could have been rescued or captured by indigenous peoples, and there's actually way more evidence for this than you might think. Cree oral traditions speak of a stranded group of white men who were either captured or rescued depending on the telling. However, given the oral nature of these legends, it's unclear what time period this is referring to. French explorer Samuel de Champlain in 1613 recorded hearing of an English boy taken in by the Algonquin people after a shipwreck in the far north. Notably, in the 1950s, a stone was found in Deep River in Ontario with the initials HH and the year 1612. Adding more interest to the narrative, the stone also had the words "captive" etched into it. Notably, no one has been able to determine when this carving was actually made. Others suspect that Hudson, his son, and remaining crew simply died of exposure, given that they were left with almost no supplies. Even though this is the least interesting theory of all, it's the one I tend to prefer, since the crew members themselves openly stated they gave them very little in the way of goods to survive on. And this was the crew members' version of events trying to make themselves look at least somewhat good and reasonable under the circumstances. On the evening of July 4th, 1947, a United Airlines flight took off from Boise, Idaho, bound for Pendleton, Oregon. For over a dozen minutes, the crew of this DC-3 witnessed a series of unusual disc-like objects in the twilight skies over the Pacific Northwest. Today, the Flight 105 UFO sighting is remembered as one of the early documented accounts by professional pilots during the wave of flying disc reports that swept the United States in 1947. The summer of 1947 marked a turning point in modern ufology. Prior to that year, isolated sightings of strange aerial phenomena had been reported, but the public did not take them seriously. The phenomenon began with Kenneth Arnold's famous report on June 24, 1947, when he described a chain of bright objects flying near Mount Rainier. Arnold estimated their speed to be far beyond that of any known aircraft, and his account quickly captured the public imagination. Newspapers began using the phrase "flying saucers" to describe these objects, a term that stuck even as subsequent reports added variations to the descriptions. In the days and weeks that followed Arnold's sighting, Hundreds of similar reports emerged from across the country. People from all walks of life, including trained military personnel and airline pilots, began to report witnessing objects that did not fit into any conventional explanation. The intense media coverage and public interest set the stage for a broader cultural phenomenon. On the evening of July 4th, 1947, United Airlines Flight 105, operated by a Douglas DC-3, departed from Boise under the watchful eye of air traffic control. In a light-hearted nod to the recent media frenzy, the control tower even joked with the crew about keeping an eye out for flying saucers. In the YouTube mysteries industry, that's what we call foreshadowing. However, the humor soon turned into astonishment when the flight crew began to observe a series of unidentified objects in the darkening sky. According to the crew's later accounts, shortly after takeoff, the pilots and a flight attendant noticed 4 or 5 objects that appeared to be arranged in a loose formation. The objects were described as being flat and circular, with a smooth underside and a rougher top. One of the objects was notably larger than the others. The crew maintained radio contact with the control tower and even reported that the objects were visible for approximately 45 miles and lasting for about 10 to 15 minutes. After this time period, they abruptly vanished, shooting off into the horizon at high speeds, just like a run-of-the-mill high-altitude weather balloon. The pilots couldn't determine whether the objects were oval, saucer-like, or of another shape. The witness, who was also in the cabin, confirmed that the objects were visible from the cockpit and were not a trick of the windows. Although the passengers did not have a view of the phenomena, the professional observations of the pilots gave the sighting a weight that would influence later investigations. Soon after the Flight 105 sighting made headlines, military authorities began to take a closer look at the accounts. The United States Army Air Forces, and later the newly formed United States Air Force, launched investigations into the numerous sightings reported during the summer of 1947. Investigators from the Air Command at Wright Field, now known as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, compiled over 100 reports and studied witness statements in detail. The initial military explanation for the Flight 105 sighting, along with other similar reports, pointed to common and familiar phenomena. Officials suggested that the objects could have been ordinary aircraft, weather balloons, birds, or even optical illusions. In the case of Flight 105, the timing of the sighting near sunset led some to argue that unusual lighting conditions and atmospheric effects might have played a part. A later official statement from the Bear Force concluded that the phenomenon was attributable to a combination of known objects and the power of suggestion or mass hysteria. Despite these explanations, the fact that the sighting was reported by a crew of experienced airline professionals left many ufologists and members of the public unconvinced. Over the decades, a number of theories have emerged to explain this UFO sighting. One popular theory among ufologists is that the objects were extraterrestrial in origin. Proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis argue that the extraordinary speed and unusual maneuverability of the objects indicate technology far beyond what was available to humans. This theory suggests that the sighting was a glimpse of advanced spacecraft visiting Earth. An alternative explanation is that the objects were experimental military aircraft. The post-World War II era was a time of rapid technological advancement in aviation. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were developing new types of aircraft and missile technology. Some researchers have speculated that the objects observed on the flight were secret military prototypes or test vehicles that were not yet known to the public. However, this theory has its weaknesses, as the objects were described as lacking conventional features such as wings or tails. Another view holds that the sighting was the result of a misperception or optical illusion caused by atmospheric conditions. At dusk, when the lighting is low and the sky is darkening, unusual reflections and mirages can occur. Critics of the extraterrestrial hypothesis point out that the official military investigation cited the possibility of such illusions as a plausible explanation. They argue that the human eye, especially under stressful conditions or in unfamiliar settings, can easily misinterpret common objects as something extraordinary. That said, this wasn't a sighting by just anybody. This was a sighting by pilots who had a lot to lose by going public with their UFO encounter. There's also a psychosocial explanation that suggests the sighting, along with the other hundreds of reports from that summer, was influenced by a collective state of excitement and expectation. The wave of flying disc sightings in 1947 coincided with a period of cultural and technological change in the United States. According to this theory, the widespread media coverage and public fascination with flying saucers created a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. People were more likely to interpret ambiguous objects as evidence of extraterrestrial vehicles. Again, though, this is weakened somewhat by the fact that the witnesses were pilots. Unfortunately, given that this sighting happened in 1947, there's no photographic evidence of what actually happened. Imelda Keenan was a 22-year-old woman whose mysterious disappearance on January 3, 1994, has haunted her family and the Waterford community ever since. Imelda had settled in Waterford City after leaving her hometown in Mount Mellick. In January 1994, she was reported to be leading a quiet and content life. On that fateful day, she left her apartment on William Street at approximately 1:30 p.m. to run errands. Witnesses recall that she was last seen walking down Lombard Street near the Tower Hotel, where a local doctor's secretary, who knew her well, observed her crossing the road. When Imelda's family went to her apartment later that day, her belongings, such as her glasses and handbag, remained untouched, suggesting that she did not plan to leave on her own accord. Her disappearance was formally reported by her brother Edward the following day after she didn't return. The initial response by the authorities was to treat Imelda's case as a missing person incident rather than one involving foul play. The Irish police didn't conduct a thorough forensic examination of her apartment or the surrounding area, and only limited witness statements were taken. This approach led to widespread criticism from Imelda's family and advocates, who argued that critical evidence could have been overlooked. Several theories have emerged over the years. One of the earliest speculations was that Imelda might have run away. However, her decision to leave behind personal belongings casts doubt on the runaway theory. Her family's long-standing contact with her, along with the fact that her bank account remained untouched, strongly suggests that she didn't intend to disappear voluntarily. Another theory, which has gained significant support among her relatives, is that Imelda was slain. Her family has repeatedly pointed to the suspicious behavior of her fiancé, Mark Wall, who quickly distanced himself from the family and whose timeline of events has been questioned. However, he's never been officially named as a suspect in the case. In 2025, the 31st anniversary of her disappearance, the Irish police issued a renewed appeal for anyone with information to come forward. Automatic writing, also known as psychography, is the process of writing without conscious intention, often attributed to spiritual or subconscious influences. Practitioners claim that during automatic writing, their hand moves involuntarily, producing text that originates from the subconscious mind or external entities. Historically, automatic writing has roots in various cultural and spiritual practices. In Chinese folk religion, a form known as fuji involved using a suspended sieve or tray to guide a stick that wrote characters, believed to be messages from deities or spirits. In the West, the practice gained prominence during the 19th century with the rise of spiritualism, where mediums claim to channel messages from the deceased through automatic writing. Psychologists have studied automatic writing to understand its origins and implications. Some suggest it results from the ideomotor effect, where individuals make motions unconsciously. Others view it as a manifestation of dissociative states, where the person's consciousness is divided, allowing hidden aspects of the psyche to emerge. In contemporary times, automatic writing is often used as a therapeutic tool to explore the subconscious mind. From an occult perspective, automatic writing is viewed as a profound method of accessing wisdom beyond ordinary conscious awareness. Practitioners often describe the process as a gateway to spiritual guidance or a connection with energies, spirits, or even higher realms of consciousness. They argue that the messages received through automatic writing often carry insights or knowledge that surpass the writer's usual understanding, suggesting an external or deeper internal source. Many believe the practice serves as a direct line to the subconscious mind, enabling individuals to bypass rational filters and tap into buried thoughts, emotions, or even latent creativity. For others, automatic writing is seen as a form of divine communication, where entities such as guides, angels, or ancestors transmit guidance or answers to pressing questions. Proponents also highlight the therapeutic benefits, claiming it facilitates emotional release and fosters self-discovery. Some report feelings of clarity, purpose, or spiritual connection after sessions, emphasizing the transformative power of the experience. However, critics argue that automatic writing lacks empirical evidence and is susceptible to the writer's biases and expectations. They further point out that the content produced often reflects the individual's knowledge and experiences, casting doubt on claims of external influence.